Alright, so this is session 4, and what we'll be talking about today will be the specification. Now, any project needs paperwork, and it needs to be able to give you an outline of the scope of the project. Now, so we'll be looking at how to incorporate your teams, what the goals are, what phases of the project, what the content you need to deliver is, the design, the functionality, how you're going to host it, how you're going to support the myriad number of devices out there. And what you've got to think about is how you're going to put it together. So you're going to make some assumptions on the outside before you get stuck into it. And you're going to be checking your progress at key milestones. And with anything, there's a deadline and a fixed amount of money. So in the last session we talked about how the style sheets can benefit you in your design, and that it doesn't matter how you use the style parameters, whether it's in an external style sheet or inline or internal, the parameters you use are the same. So this one we're just going to have a look at how an organization approaches a project, how they look at approaching a new design or a redesign, and what you need to think about is, when you're looking at this, is the target audience. Who is the site or the web pages targeted to? Project is made up of a bunch of people, and you should have a list of the people involved in your project so that you know who's involved, what their roles are, and how to contact them. Because one of the things that occur quite often now is not everybody is sitting under the same roof, or so with collaboration and the internet, remote work, you don't know where the people are going to be actually located. We need to know what the goals of the project are. This gives your key developers an idea of what the outcome that they're trying to achieve is, and this can influence the way they approach the design. Now, for you in this subject, a lot of this is a little bit over the top, but you got to start thinking in the terms that a business is going to apply to you when you get into the job. So they're going to be talking about having project goals that are specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-based. So that's known as SMART. So there's no point in setting a goal that you can't measure. Alright, so it's got to be clearly defined. You've got to have some way of measuring it. So in the example there, monthly sales requires 10% increase within 3 months. So that's quite a specific goal. It's measurable because you can measure that 10% growth. It's time related, so you know you've got to achieve it within a time frame. Can it be assigned? Well, generally speaking, you've got sales team, so you know who's generally responsible for it. Is it realistic? Well, I don't know. Depends on size of the company, what they're selling, how saturated the market is. But that's the idea behind setting goals within a project. Now, that same process needs to be applied to any project. So, in the examples, we'll probably stick to like a sales, because that's what a lot of websites are based around, is selling stuff. And it's where our scripts will potentially come in, interfacing with things. So you need, for an example, break it up into smaller components, and this allows you to set goals for each phase. It also allows you to assign personnel, because it may not need to be set out as a progress, as in you need to do phase 1 before you can proceed to phase 2. What it may be is broken up into concepts that are achievable targets that need to be brought together as a whole for the page or the website. So you need to sit down and design your structure of your site. So if it's a complex site, or it's going to tend to have multiple pages if it's an enterprise website. So you're going to have the home page, which is where people land, and then you're going to have information about the company, what they provide, any sort of communications they want to provide through the site, and generic contact details to contact the business. Now, depending on the scope, I mean, this is a very generic one, but you generally will see a little blurb about the firm, what they offer, some form of communications back and forth, and general contact details. The rest that lies underneath that can vary greatly depending on the size and the type of services that are being offered. Now, some of them will be fairly static in that they won't change a lot, such as about the company, but other sites, pages within the site can be quite dynamic, being updated regularly with news. Like on the home page, you might want to, depending on what the person's doing, swap out various elements, and this is where our scripting will come into play. You need to know what sort of information you want to display in each section. So once that is established, what the goal is, and then you can work out what the information you need to gather from the firm, and then you can work out your data sets, and then work out how you're going to display that content. Now, classifications, tagging, you need to come prepared with a plan to lay out your site. Now, not going to go through and read it. You can read it all by yourself later, but you basically break down your categories based on the industry that your client's working in and what information they want to provide. You then have some templates to apply. Most firms, if they're in web development, will work off a generic set of templates and then modify them based on the client requirements. So you select your common templates, rough them out. Remember to have meetings with your clients before you get too far into the process, because the client, you need to engage the client during this process, and before you get into serious coding, you need to get them to prove the concepts. You need to work out how you're going to present the information. Is it going to be straight text within the HTML? You're going to link PDFs? Are you going to have images? Uploading files? What is happening image-wise? You then have to apply color schemes and design schemes to each page, if you like. So this is your colors, type of text, what's, your tooltips. So if you hover over something, what's going, the standard sort of information that's going to provide, whether there's animation. Grid system is referring to the layout, the formatting of the page. And you don't want to overwhelm people with too much. And this is where interaction is important. We also need to remember that not everyone is going to be viewing the information on the same type of device. A lot of people are using their smartphones, tablets, rather than desktops. So we need to be able to adapt our design approach to cater for the variety of devices that will be accessing the information. So this is where we kind of need to look at floating columns and things like that so that they can automatically rearrange themselves depending on the device and the browser type that is viewing it. Now, a company will have their brand. It's very rarely that you get to just have a free fall. Generally speaking, there is a corporate logo, corporate colors, fonts, that sort of thing. It's their image, their brand. So you need to take those things into your design and then propagate that without overwhelming or destroying the actual overall goal of the project. So a website is just part of their marketing infrastructure. So it's got to tie in with their other business literature that is available, and it's got to be basically instantly recognizable as part of the same organization. Now, this is where some people get a little bit lost, is that they forget the functionality of what they're doing. Some people get all caught up in the creativity and the presentation of a image they have in their head, and occasionally they forget about the functionality. So you've got to be able to incorporate the requirements of the client into the site. Now, this may require applications, interface points. We've got social media. So maybe if somebody has corporate has a social media presence, maybe if something's sent out in the corporate Twitter account, you might want to have a third-party application there that picks up any new tweets and embeds them automatically into the site, that sort of thing. These are the things we've got to think about. And if it is a site that has a shopping cart, so an e-commerce, you've got to look at how they're going to order, how they're going to pay, the security that is required for that, what languages need to be made available. This is where the user target is. Who's going to have access to it, who's going to maintain it, and who's going to be able to access the various elements, stock levels, order processing, financial transactions. All this needs to be taken into account. Don't worry, seems a little bit overwhelming at this stage, but remember, this is an introduction, so just think along the lines of this is all the concepts that you're being loaded up with in the front, and that this is the goals that we work together towards when we deliver a project. So accessibility items, we've talked about that in basic HTML. We want to assign the language being used so that text to speech applications and things can easily recognize what language the site's using, that sort of thing. Test your progress on several different types of browsers and devices. It is pretty important so that you don't exclude a range of devices unintentionally. So over the years, I've seen a lot of people, design a page and the only thing they've tested it on is their preferred web browser, and then you start getting complaints in from various users saying it doesn't work on their browser on this version. So try to test it out as many as possible. So to give you an idea of the type of browsers that are in use, to give you a rough, this is just one example. Chrome there is basically 2/3 of the traffic in this, where this data was collected. Then Safari, Facebook, Internet Explorer, and it goes down from there. So do a bit of research, find out what your target audience is more likely to use, and then it gives you an idea of which major ones you should cater for, and depending on the scope and your budget, you can test it on the more rarer forms. Now, one of the things that needs to occur is you create this page or the website. What's the difference? A page is a single document. A site is multiple documents linked together. You've got to put it somewhere where it can be accessed by the general public or the client. Now, in one of your other topics, I believe 427, ICT 427 or 421, you've probably touched on WordPress. It's one of the sites that is, marketed fairly heavily for basic website design, and they provide hosting services. So you basically need to subscribe to somewhere where you can upload the site so that it can be accessed, whether that's on an internal server or an external hosted server. It's just got to be placed there so that people can access it. Now, each project needs to be supported over a period of time. So it's not just the initial creation, it's the long-term support needs to be thought about as well. So who's going to have access, who's going to maintain it, who's going to continue to look at the security implications, who's going to review the performance. So basically, specify this in the document or get it into the document. The specification works for both. Works for the client because they want to basically the contract to get certain things done, and for you as the contractor, this is the document that says whether you've met the performance criteria or not. So it pays for you to understand these documents and to make them work for you. Now, assumptions are always going to be a part of a project, and as long as you clearly define what they are and how they relate to a task or the project, then we need to understand that. So an example of that is when we're implementing a website, we're going to assume that we'll add the content. Now, if that's not the case, this is where the specification comes in. If you're writing the specification for somebody else to work with, they might give you an empty shell so that they do all the templates, they do all the links, and then hand it back to you, and you've got to produce the content. This is where you need things in the document to clarify these points. Like, you make the assumption they will add the content, provide some options for the design, the layout. They're going to provide them on-site training, maintenance. Maybe you want them to provide the hosting service. It might be something they offer. The other point you need to do on any project is have your milestones. Now, milestones are checkpoints. Okay. This is a key point. We're going to compile what we have. We're going to sit down with everybody, key stakeholders, and get approval. They're happy with it at this point, and moving on. So the basic design principles, the development, the format, the look and feel, injection of content, testing to make sure all your scripts and your interfaces work, get them to approve it, then take it live. Going live is basically the last one. Now, most companies will have a very tight and strict deadlines with penalties around it. Unless it's a government contract, then they just hand you money, hand over fist, and never have an end date. There is a general consensus that if it's an IT project, it's always going to be over budget and exceed time. That occurs for a couple of key reasons. Poorly defined scopes and the allowance of continuous change to the scope after the project has been initialized. So they give you one scope, and then in these key points they keep adding things. So that's called a variation. What you need to be aware of if you do a variation is it's going to cost more money and more time. And it needs to be put into the paperwork as well. Why do I bring it up here? Because it affects this thing here called a budget. Okay? Companies do have a limit on their money. So you as a developer, organization, will want a regular payment from the client as you progress through your milestones, and you as a customer, an organization, will want to see those milestones being met before you make a partial payment as per the financial statements and agreed targets in the scope. So this is where we come through and want to have a look at some templates. Got a couple of templates in that uploaded into the Discord server for you to have a look at. Not going to get you to rush out and fill them out or anything like that now, but have a look at them. They're a good sort of generic expectations. They cover a lot of things. Now, whenever you're using templates, they're not rock solid. They're a template. They're there to give you a rough format of expectations. You add and subtract sections and tweak it as is appropriate for your application of that template at that time. So have a look at them later on down the track. If you need to develop a specification, it gives you some key topics to look at and consider. If you want to find out more about it, down the bottom there, High-Rise Digital is a reference site. Now, there's quite a few reference sites that sort of cover this material, and a lot of them will basically have the same content, but they'll have it in slightly different headers and that sort of thing. But the process of project management and how it applies to IT is pretty standard. And that basically concludes our section for today.